Welcome to Dawn's on Me. I'm Dawn Kirk, and today we have Rhonda Solis with us. She's on the state school board and she's running for her second term, so I'd love to learn more because you know I love education. So, Rhonda, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a seventh generation Coloradoan. So actually, my family was here before this was Colorado. And I have family that grew up in Erie. My grandparents were from Trinidad and Walsenburg. And so I lived in Erie for a while. And then I moved to Greeley, where I finished my education, my K-12 education, graduated from Greeley West High School. Go Spartans. And at that time, I was actually afraid to go to college. So I didn't have a lot of support at the time. And I had done a program within my high school where they find you a job outside and you get like business experience. So I was doing that in a dental office. And I ended up kind of going in the back part and learning the assistant part. And so that's kind of where my career has been. So I started out as a dental assistant, moved up to the front, then to management. And that's kind of where I continue now. I prefer to work in sole proprietor dental offices. So I've only worked in three. And I just kind of love it. And in a weird way, I think it kind of prepped me for politics because dentistry is not a place where people like to go. And so I've been able to talk with people and make them feel more comfortable and really use the ability to communicate and make people feel like it's a place that they're welcomed. And I think that's kind of what you have to do when you're putting your message out there about what you want to do politically. So it kind of aligned within itself. Our school didn't have a lot of people of color. And so that whole thing was a thing for me. And the office that I ended up working for after high school was actually owned by a female dentist, which at the time it just was not. You didn't see very many female dentists. I think we had two in Greeley at the time. And so when I worked for her, I just saw how amazing she was, and she was top of her field. And I just kind of absorbed everything that I could from her and just really kind of found my strength as a woman. And after that, I had a couple of instances though that kind of reminded me, yes, I'm a strong woman, but I'm also a strong woman with brown skin. And there will continually be people that will try to remind me of that. And I have got to figure out what I need to develop in my toolbox to make sure that I can address that and get through it without falling apart or being totally angry and wanting to lash out. And so I ended up joining a women's group called Hispanic Women of Weld County. And in that group, I learned and met, amazing women and what they were about, their history. And some were teachers, some were business owners. And that was really where I learned about the history of Colorado and people that looked like me and the shoulders that I stand on that of great achievement. And that, my chin should be high and I should be walking around very proudly with as a woman with brown skin. And once I kind of got that confidence, I started to really go out into my community and figure out how can I help in my community because I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this. And so I started doing community activist work. I've served on several boards and different commissions. I've done some political training in Denver with the hopes that maybe someday I would run for office. And somebody asked me, you should think about running for your local school board. There's an opening. And I wasn't quite sure if that was the first office I wanted to run for. So I did some looking into it. And at the time, our district was over 50% Latino, and there was no representation on our school board. And so that was the defining moment, like, yep, it needs to be me. So I decided to run. There were 4 seats open, 8 people running. There was a 4-person conservative slate running together. I think I was like number 7 in donations. My largest out of community donation was from Aurora, and that was my mom. It was $200. I think I raised maybe about $2,100 for that campaign. And out of the 8 of us, I was number 7 in donations, but I was number 3 in votes. And that was because people knew who I was. They had met me in the community. They knew what I stood for, and they showed up to vote. So those people that think your vote doesn't count, it really does. It counted for me. I got elected at the time. Our board was really, or our school district was really struggling. We were that district where if people were looking for a job, they would ask about District 6 and people would say, no, don't go to District 6. And, we had some work to do. So we ended up changing our superintendent and doing some inner work with consensus decision-making training, and really working through some of those issues with our internal staff, our teachers, our union, our administrators, and really starting to trust each other again. After that, we had to do that in our community. So that was a whole nother level of work. And we were able to pass our first levy override during that time because of that work. And I know had we not done that, it would not have passed because we had 2 other attempts that failed. So there was a lot of healing that we did, a lot of working together and bringing the community together. And at that time, we had some really great elected officials at the city level and also a great director at our chamber. And there were some conversations happening about how we could all work together. So we actually had school board members, county commissioners, city officials, and people from the chamber, business leaders. We all took a trip to Kalamazoo, Michigan to learn how they did the Kalamazoo Promise. And we brought some of those ideas back to Greeley and Evans and tried to make our own and create our own situation like that. And so it came to a city development in our downtown area, putting in a hotel to bring in more businesses. And the Kalamazoo Promise is a scholarship for every child who graduates from a Kalamazoo high school. And it's a guaranteed scholarship and it lasts for 10 years. You have 10 years to use it. And we were just so impressed at what they were doing for students, how they came together as a community to do that work. And we decided we wanted to do that. And I can tell you, I was so proud of my community. We are very conservative, and there's some things that we just are never going to agree on. But we came together, and kids were our main focus, and students, and producing good, high quality education for our students. And that's just a successful run during the 8 years that I served. So I served 2 terms. The second term, I was unopposed, so I didn't really have to campaign, which was nice. And so, yeah, we just did some amazing things in our community, and we learned how a district can't do it alone. It really takes all of us to step up, and the work that you can do and the results you can get when that happens is just miraculous. So again, I brag about my community all the time at the state level and talk about our story and how I truly feel like that's the answer to make sure that districts are producing and educating kids the way they should. And so I was done with that. It was during COVID. My last years on that were during COVID, and that was pretty intense. There was a time where I was escorted in and out by police because they were afraid of what was happening and what was coming into the boardroom. So that was an experience. So afterwards, I was ready to take a break, but I did start taking a leadership class. And then I also helped start a nonprofit called the Latino Coalition of Weld County. Our hope was to teach other people of color and help them be more confident in serving on boards and commissions and teaching them just how that structure is. I mean, even just like Robert's Rules of Order, or, how you kind of look for something that you want to apply for, and possibly, encouraging people to actually run for office. In that organization, we were actually part of the redistricting conversation and the map that was going to happen because of the census. We had such a high number of people that had moved into the area. It was necessary that we create a new congressional district. So we were actually part of those conversations and really fighting hard for Greeley Evans to be part of this new map, this new district. So we did a lot of testimony and worked with people on the maps, and we ended up getting in. So we were now part of this brand new congressional district, District 8. And it was exciting because this district has a high population of people of color. And we truly felt that we could have a voice and really be represented by people that we haven't felt really represented by before. And so that was really exciting. The interesting thing is that opened up a seat at the State Board of Education. And so the phone started ringing, because people knew that I had just got done serving on a local board. And I had to go through that process again, because at first I was like, no, I can't. I'm so tired. I just can't. But then I looked at the state board, and again, no people of color. And so I was like, yep, I got to do this. And so I decided to run. It was a lot different than my local election. I was out there actually educating, one, people on this new district and that they're in it. And then 2, what the State Board of Education even does, because nobody had really even heard of the office. It kind of goes under the radar because it's not fancy and big, and we don't make the news a lot. Except for that's changed just because of the political climate around education. And so, yeah, I ended up winning. And it's been challenging because once I won, I was really excited. You serve 6-year terms. Unfortunately, after I was elected, I found out that my term would only be 2 years, which I had no idea about. You couldn't find that anywhere on the Secretary of State website. You couldn't Google it. I had like no knowledge, and everybody that I talked to didn't know either. And if you actually looked at the Secretary of State website, my information and Kathy Plummer's information, she ran for the at-large seat, our information was identical. So according to them, I did win a 6-year term. But because of the legislation around redistricting, like it was like 131 pages that kind of delved into everything around redistricting. There's this little statute in there that says my term would only be 2 years because they try really hard to stagger the state board seats when it comes to running again. And so I found out that I was only going to be serving for 2 years. And this is a seat that has no pay. So that was, yeah, a huge awakening, and not the exact way I wanted to start in state politics. It was really frustrating to know that these barriers are there, and that like no one talked to me about it, nobody knew about it, nobody warned me. And so, I'm thinking in my mind's eye about every other person that's going to come after me, and how do I clean this up and make it better for them? Because it really should not be this difficult to run for office. You should know what you're running for. You should know how long the term is. And the other thing is, the voters of Congressional District 8 didn't even know that they were just voting for me for a 2-year term. And so that was another thing that I really, really struggled with. And, I want to think of ways that we can help voters understand all the different terms of these different offices, because unless you're in it, there's no way for you to really know, like, how long is a mayor's race, or, how long do you serve? How long do you serve as a school board or house district? Those are things that we could probably figure out a way to make sure that we're educating people. So not only one, so they know, but two, maybe they'll consider running. And so these are constantly things besides education are kind of, going in my head, in my mind, of what I need to also do as I'm in this seat. And so then I knew I had to run again. So I had my staff look at everything, and I said, I do not want to be surprised again. Please confirm that I would be running for an actual 6-year term. There was nothing we could do to change it after the election. You can't do anything that would be retroactive. So I just wanted to make sure that we had everything, all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted, and that we were ready to go. Everything looked good. But then my sister, who was my treasurer, was looking at the Secretary of State website, and she's like, Rhonda, I'm not political. I don't know a lot about this, but it still doesn't look right. You might want to look into it. So I ended up calling the head of the state Democrats, which is Shad. So Shad called, and he couldn't really get a straight answer. And then I decided, okay, well, I'm going to make the phone call. And so I made the phone call, and I couldn't get a straight answer either. So we ended up actually having to hire an attorney, and they contacted the Secretary of State. And the way the Secretary of State was looking at the legislation and the way it was written, they were saying that it was always just going to be a 2-year seat, which is weird because every other congressional seat for State Board of Ed is 6 years. So why would our district be different? And so we had two options. We could sue as a congressional district because we wouldn't have the same representation, or we can connect with a representative and get something passed at the beginning of the session, and make sure that we get it done before too long into the election. And so we were in that process, but me being who I am, I'm making phone calls and educating people of what's going on, and temperatures are starting to rise. It ends up getting out, and actually our attorney general thought it was crazy that we were having to go through this, and he thought it was pretty clear. So he made an actual judgment and a legal opinion, and it came out at the end of October of last year. So I am officially now running for a 6-year term, and I have it in writing.
Oh, that's such. I mean, I appreciate hearing. It's upsetting, to know that you had to go through all of that, but it's also really helpful to hear how you had to do so many different layers to finally get somebody who could make it easy, right? And like the power of knowing who the right people are, and one conversation or 50 before it to figure out which one is the right conversation. It's helpful, right? Because that's it. Also, what you're trying to share. It's just this experience of knowing that you just have to keep asking sometimes, because sometimes you talk to people who act like they're the person, they're the authority, they're the one person who can make that decision, and they're not. And it's easy to just get that roadblock and go, oh, I guess that's the answer. And it's so great to hear how you just went, no, that's probably not right, especially when everything else is 6 years. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I'm so glad you got that worked out for everyone in CD8. So you're running again. Now, this time it will be a 6 year term. Um, you've been in long enough to go through a lot of things in a short amount of time. I mean, we're still going through so much in education. What are some of the things that were probably the most eye opening besides just not even knowing how long you're going to serve? What else did you deal with in the last 2 years?
So, I think COVID was really difficult for people. And I know people that were on the front lines, and that's teachers, really, really have struggled. And I know our students struggled. And I think, that was really hard as we move forward. And I'm in this seat and in this platform. What can I do to help in that scenario? And one was just talking with people, knowing that we just never fully unwrapped what we all just went through, and knowing that this is trauma. Like we've all been through some trauma, and we're going to have a little grace with each other at a time where there's a lot of people not being so graceful. And we need to raise the bar and raise the conversation and really support our teachers and give them the kudos of saving us through COVID and being, able to pivot and do all these different things at, the drop of a dime, which is what they did. And they just kept doing it. And I don't think people fully understand how difficult these jobs are. And it has been heartbreaking to see the amount of backlash and just attacks that our teachers have taken on since COVID. And I feel like it's our responsibility at the state level to change that narrative. We need to be the champions and cheerleaders of public education and all of those that participate and do this work and job with us. And so I feel like number one, that was something that I really wanted to make sure that I was doing at the state board level and really elevating why education is so important and why we should all care and why this matters, whether you have kids in the district or not. These are going to be our next doctors, our next inventors, our next politicians, our next, people that solve big problems. And some of these problems were created by us adults. Some of them are, problems that we just have not been able to come up and work together to solve. And we're going to have to ask them to do that. And so, I just think that we need to really fight hard to up the level of how we revere public education because I'm a product of public education, my kids are, and we have benefited from that, and everyone should have the ability to benefit from a public education. And so I think that was one of the biggest things I went in there with, is wanting to make sure that I highlighted that, along with learning all the different systems and different things around education. There are a lot, which is why there's so many people at CDE, which is the Colorado Department of Education. And they really do grapple with a lot of different scenarios and situations in a state where education isn't always viewed the same. Communities aren't identical. And so being able to truly help around this without stepping on toes, or putting my value system on your value system in your community, those that's a big responsibility. So we really need to make sure that we have people at the state board that value that and that can really, stand for who they represent, which is, for me, CD8, and that's Weld County, Adams County, and part of Larimer, which Larimer is basically Berthoud. But yeah, so everything kind of on the 85 corridor is in Congressional District 8. So lots to learn. I'm still learning. And some of it is good stuff. Some of it is exciting stuff. Some of it is knowing that we have this partnership at the state level to really help us in areas that, us as local districts may not know how to tackle. And so having that guidance and being able to phone a friend, I think is really helpful. But I think we have had to work on our reputation even at CDE in making sure that people understand, this is an agency that needs to hold people accountable. We need to make sure that kids are learning. And, there is some punishment things that the state board can do, but our hope is to actually be support and not punish. And that really needs to be the goal that we set as we want strong districts that then actually, ripple out to a good community where everyone can get involved and stand up and make sure that their district is strong.
Yeah, and I appreciate watching the things that have really rose up in the last couple of years that are in that category. And I know there's been a huge debate, right? Because we are a state that has so many diverse school districts, so many diverse opinions and pockets where people have really strong opinions. And so these things are definitely raising all the way up. And I appreciate the process that you've went through that is really working through it. And I know that it hasn't been easy. I mean, I've watched some of these things from where I sit and I'm hearing like, well, you guys could just be the accountability. I mean, that is part of what you do, right? And there's times when I'm like, yes, do that. But I've also been on the other side where I'm like, I'm really glad you don't. I'm really glad that there's, this partnership still that is really making sure that the resources are there and that there is that whole like resource that comes with it.
Well,
Um,
and I
so
think when I came to the state board, I was very clear. I mean, I kind of did a lay of the land, who was sitting on the board, and kind of what CDE does. And I was very clear that what is going to be different about me on this state board is that you have people that are on the board that have a lot of experience in the education world, and you have a lot of people within CDE that have done the same thing. And so a lot of the way they view things is within a district outward. And I was very clear with everybody I talked to at CDE when I was first doing, introductions and having conversations, is I'm going to look at this different. I view everything community inward. And from where I come from in CD8, that is a lot of what we do in our communities. It is about community supporting our district, and we have those partnerships. Sometimes we have to work on them. Sometimes we have a shift because there's a different city council person or a different school board person, or there's a change within the district, like the superintendent's different, or we have some principal changes or population shifts. All of those things we in CD8 address as communities. And so that's a very different view than what happens in the Denver metro area, I feel sometimes. And it's different than what some of the board members that represent very large urban areas. Their views are different on how they tackle education. So it's been very, very important that I keep a very strong local control community voice at the state board, because that's what I truly represent. And so I've been trying to learn all the different caveats within my own district of how that looks and how that feels. I feel like I kind of have a pulse on that. And so I kind of know what direction or what conversation or questions to ask. But I truly, truly want to make sure that people in CD8 know that I represent them. I'm there to make decisions to help them do better as a community. And I know a strong district means strong neighborhoods, and that means great stuff for communities. I mean, we know that if a business is going to come set up something in your area, they're going to look at your district. If a family is going to move to your area, they look at your district. That's like tax revenue now that we're talking about, not just education and schools. That's tax revenue. So that's community. So this is a bigger conversation for us and the way we view things that may be a little bit different than they do in the metro.
I love that. I do. I lived in Greeley for a while and I loved it. Just was too far away from everything else because I am from the other side of I-25. Everything I do, all my jobs, everything was over here. So it was only the commute that made it a challenge. But that's exactly what I looked at. I mean, it was when I was pregnant the first time, it was a big deal. And that was what I wanted to know. And I got to tour some of your schools just last fall. It was so fun. I came away and I honestly, didn't know what to expect because we were looking at so many different parts of the state. But it was so fun to get to see what you guys have done with your career in tech. And so, as I'm listening to you talk about what you were doing when you were in that district, I can make that connection. I can see where you planted those seeds and all that work that you did to do that community in showed up in the schools. And I have talked about your career in tech options, oh, I don't even know, probably every couple weeks since I went and visited because there were things there and I love tech ed. That's a big deal for me too. So obviously I'm having those conversations and to really get the richness that you have in a program that you're building, that it really just took off, is was exciting to me. There were definitely things that I want to pull in, and I've just last week championing again to bring what you created. So thought you might want to hear that, because I know you're in a position now where you're you're putting out fires, you're dealing with a lot of stuff. You may not get a chance to enjoy some of the fun things. So thank you for inspiring all of that with the work that you did. It is a big deal, and it shows up. And you know, as you said, we're creating our future generations. These are the people who are going to do this work for us, right? So you want construction trade people who know what they're doing. You want your mechanic to know what they're doing. You want your beautician to know what you're doing. All of that is also really important, because all three of those things are a huge thing to everybody. You know, we share that, and the second that your hair gets screwed up, it has a huge impact. I mean, it's a big deal.
Right.
So thank you.
And what's great
Yeah.
about what we've been doing is, you may leave with a certificate. That doesn't mean that that's end all be all. That means that could be something that gets you money while you extend your college, education. It's not
Yeah.
meant to be that that's the last thing you're going to do. It's like, no, this is a tool to help you create some money to actually go to college if you want to do something different, or take that next level of whatever it is that you want to do. And so that's what I love about our program. I'm going to be very honest. I was concerned when we started talking about this stuff that we would just be pushing kiddos of color in that
Mhm.
direction and not really pushing them to go to college. And I have been very conscious and deliberate in the work that I was doing on the board to make sure that I was expressing, that that cannot be the way this is. I will not allow, we as a community will not allow that. So we have got to make sure that these are equal opportunities for all students, and that it will be the students and the families that decide and choose, not us as a district, and that it really needs to come from the student of what they really see for their lives. And that is the deciding factor. So we do have to be careful still that we don't pigeonhole kids and we don't put them in a box and we don't assume. We really need to allow them to, really look at the different options and really see what speaks to them, and what gets them excited. And I think that's what
Yeah.
these CTE programs do. It For some of us, it's hands-on. Like, that's how we learn,
Mhm.
that's how we do best.
Mhm.
And so for some of these kids to be able to connect what they're learning in this math class to welding or to construction or to, how you do the chemicals
Technology.
when you're doing beauty, dyeing someone's
Mhm.
hair. So there's all these different connection things that we need to do for kids that, yes, this is relevant. This will help you. And this is how. We're just going to give you a smidget of that. But in the future, there's going to be other ways that you're going to be able to make these connections.
Yeah. Well, and I love it too, because it's the only way that we have in K-12 where somebody can leave as a graduate and go make a living wage in this area. And so that's a great thing, right?
Right.
Because we're talking about a lot of people going all the way through their university programs and then still not being able to afford to live here. And so to be able to give that to people at 16, 17, 18 is amazing. To have it be part of this working experience that helps them with engineering or helps them figure out, I really do want to do this type of work, is awesome. And all of those are also things that you can do your whole life, right? I mean,
Right.
I love that I have a son who's a tradesman who does general construction, and then I have a son who's a mechanic, and that is so fantastic for me,
You are
because I mean,
set.
right? And my daughter just got her esthetician, and so these are big money things, right? It was so
They
nice
are.
to have my son come over and help me figure out how I was going to do some stuff. Um, so it's awesome to have that as well. And regardless of what they do with the rest of their lives, you need to you you have those skills that you can use no matter what else you're doing. So
Yep.
you did
You
great
always have a
work there.
backup plan. Yep.
Yeah. So as you think about what you're doing next, what's up for the next 6 years? What are the kinds of things that are on your radar that you want to take on or talk about that we haven't yet?
So I've kind of started this already, just because, again, I feel like I kind of went in naive at the state level. I feel like we just weren't having these conversations in my community, even around education. Like, and the subject is charters. Like we have charters in our community, and it's kind of been an ongoing conversation, some good, some bad for us, especially kiddos of color. It did seem like white flight, and that hasn't really changed much. Like they do have kiddos of color, but it definitely does not mirror our community. But when I was on the school board, we worked really hard to do a better job at having a relationship with our charters and not have it be so contentious. And the superintendent that we hired when I was on the board and continues to serve has done an amazing job of bringing people together, and that includes our charters. Like our charter directors, they they work really well with Dr. Pilch, and they can have great conversations, and it does feel more like a community, like we're doing this work together, where before it felt really competitive. And so I feel like we've done a lot of work on those relationships, but we haven't really had more conversations about like other charters or more charters. I mean, we kind of did. We had some local people that wanted to start a charter in our community, and it was teachers. And it was the daughter of actually the principal at the elementary school that I went to. And they just had this, different vision of education and, project learning based kind of education. And so they wanted to start a charter. But we ended up meeting with them and saying, you know what, we agree. This is a great idea. But instead of being a charter, why don't we bring you in the district and this be a district option? And then we can actually learn from you. And there could be things that we actually emulate throughout the district. This could be a win-win. Let's do this. So that's actually what we ended up doing. We brought it in the district, and now it's part of the district. And it's been very successful. And it's a great learning experience, kind of our own educational lab, which I kind of think that's what charters were supposed to be. But I'm still totally not clear on that conversation either. So going to the state level, that charter conversation is very different.
Oh
And
yeah.
I was really shocked and surprised because I feel like I bring two different lenses to this seat. One is serving on a local board and learning a lot about community and being a product of it, and also my children. And then also this other lens of community activists and really pushing around access, equity, and making sure that people feel like they're part of a community. And that includes neighborhoods, that includes your neighborhood school, that includes family centers. And so that's been a lot of the work that I've done in my community. So going to the state level and sometimes even meeting people who I have done activist work with, and we were now kind of on the opposite sides of this charter conversation. And that has been a huge struggle for me because I didn't expect it at all. And I didn't expect this big push that I've seen at the Denver metro area around the charter conversation. And so I kind of did what I did when I served on my local board. I mean, what we learned is that once you get in there, you need to look at all the different systems you have. You need to break down all the system and what's working, what's not. And if it's not working, then it's out of here. If it's working but needs to be tweaked, then you need to do that work, and you need to have a plan, and you need to be able to show that, this was successful. And so that was kind of my question at the state board just a few weeks ago, was just like, so I'm not really sure why this all started over 30 years ago. Like I wasn't part of that conversation. What was the intent? And if we take a pulse now, is it achieving what we thought it was going to achieve? I mean, are these the outcomes we were supposed to have? Because to me, it doesn't feel like this was, a successful run. But maybe I'm not looking at it right. Maybe I need to, talk to some additional people, or I need to get some more data, or there's something I'm missing in this. And when I first got elected, we had already in the process that a third party was going to come in and kind of look at our systems and stuff around, just education and accountability. And they came in, and in that report, it pretty much said that charters are really not outperforming traditional public ed, like what I'm familiar with. They're really not outperforming them. So I was just kind of confused as to this whole charter conversation. And as I dig a little deeper and I look at other communities that have already done this experiment like Chicago, New Orleans, you just kind of have to sit back and say, okay, is this really about kids? Is this really about students and education, or is there something else going on here? And I think this election cycle, watching the CD2 race, was really eye opening for me. And it made me ask more questions and it made me connect more dots. And I even have more concerns. And so I think we as a state really need to have this conversation of charters. What are the good ones? How can we, replicate that? What do we really want charters to do for us in Colorado? And what do we really need to make sure that we're doing for traditional public ed? Because I don't think you can compare the two when you're underfunding one and then you have outside money coming into another. Like, I couldn't really tell you as a state board member what some of these charters are really using and how much it's costing as far as per pupil funding to really get the results that they're getting, because some of that stuff just isn't as transparent as I would like it to be. And so I think these are some big questions that we need to have as a state and who we want to be. I kind of see us more as, we fight for all Coloradoans, and that means neighborhood schools, that means good communities. And it's hard for me as a person of color because I feel like the conversation has always been you as a kiddo of color, where you live and the people you're around, that's not good enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to pluck you out of that and we're going to put you over here where we can help you be who you should be, because that can't. And my solution is no, you need to fix the neighborhood, and you need to, make sure you're doing the funding that you need to for that school. And that needs to be the work. You don't get to get off the hook and not work on the neighborhood and not work on the school and pluck a few kids out and say you're successful. That does not work for me. And I have a prime example. I have a cousin who lives in a tough neighborhood in the metro, and her kid goes to a charter, but she's afraid for her kid to go outside and play. And she didn't want him to go to the neighborhood school because she was afraid of that too. And that shouldn't be okay. That shouldn't be enough to say, oh, my kid goes to this separate charter outside of the community and I feel much better. That's not good enough for me. I feel like she should feel comfortable in her neighborhood. And if it's a choice that she wants to go to that charter, or she has this great neighborhood school and she still chooses the charter, that's great. But what about all the other kids that are in that neighborhood? Who's fighting for them? And that's what I feel like I need to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think, what is still unclear to me is that we have, a very diverse set of charters. There is a lot of different flavors, and that hasn't been as consistent, right? That's part of what it's the pro of it, so to speak, is that they have the ability to be more flexible or creative. But part of what you just talked about and how they can do that is because they were creative with funding as well. And so when we look at the investment in resources and knowing that that has such a strong connection to outcomes, it does matter, right? What are we funding, and are we getting the outcomes we want? And if we're not, and it is because our funding model leaves something to be desired that shows the difference, then that is definitely worthy of our time, which obviously we know our funding model is something that still needs work. We just made a good improvement on it, but we are still, 35th in the nation. That impacts every kid. And if we are allowing things to get siphoned out of the system without having the same accountability measures and oversight, and the same outcomes, then that's definitely not what we want, right? And so to understand that we have something to expect is important.
You can look at the CD2 race, and there's almost $1 million that has been put into a state board of ed race. So you have to ask yourself, why all this money? What is that about? Because there are people making money off of it and they're trying to protect it. That's what we see in every industry. When you see a lot of money, going into a race, you follow the money. And that tells you a lot about what's going on, unfortunately. And I think there's too many situations like that. And it's not about kids. I mean, I see the same people donating in CD2 in this race that donated to or endorsed a candidate that I would have lots of questions about, and I would be really worried if that person had gotten elected when it comes to kids of color. I see those same people donating to my opponent who was endorsed by Moms for Liberty. And so my question is this, there isn't anything else that you look for in a candidate besides whether they're pro or against charters. It's not about what they feel about kids of color and what their plan is or how to close the gaps or like none of those questions. It just comes down to that one question. And the differences between some of these candidates, and it's just like you are really showing what you stand for and what you represent, and it does not look well. And if that's something that I need to make sure that I'm bringing to the forefront and having conversations, about, then I will do that. Because this is not going to be on the backs of kids, especially kids of color or LGBTQ kids. And I think that's been the other struggle. So, in Denver, they have a lot of really amazing leaders of color that have been in elected office that, have superintendent jobs or, have all these different positions around education. They have nonprofits, they have different organizations that support Black and Brown communities and support our LGBTQ. They have this strong network of that. And sometimes I feel like it's a sense of they want to be able to start certain schools for those, certain groups or specific needs that are there, which I understand. I hear that. But you
Yeah.
also have to understand what you've done is open the door for the complete opposite to be opening up in communities like mine, where we don't have that support system. And we're already, it's been a struggle for us around racism. It's been a struggle for us around LGBTQ issues. We're getting there. And all kids are welcome. And we need to do that. And we need more training for people around these issues because they are complex. And we're going at a slower pace. But what we're getting in our communities is the complete opposite when it comes to some of these charters, which really makes me nervous as we're trying to progress as communities, that they will actually take us backwards. And so I don't know if they know that that was the unintended consequence and if they're okay with that, because we haven't had that conversation. No one's come to Greeley to talk to me about the charters. No people of color, not the Colorado League of Charters. Nobody's come to our communities to have this conversation, which to me tells me that they don't care. It's all about Denver Metro, and they're the ones that are driving legislation. They're the ones that are driving all the rules. And that concerns me because as we know, especially in our rural areas, those are very different needs. And we need to make sure that they're at the table. And they have some great representation. I mean, Michelle Murphy is a rock star. But I don't know if we're necessarily having this conversation. And I don't know if we've really understood how the energy has been building around this issue in the Denver metro and that it's going to start trickling out. And are we ready for that? And what does that look like? Because the state board actually has a lot of power. And I didn't realize until I was on the state board, and now I have an example of they can take charter authorization authority away from a district if they show a pattern of denying charters from starting up in their community. And that was just mind blowing to me. And we see that happen to Cooter. Cooter still doesn't have full authorization around charters in their community. And now they have declining enrollment. Now they're having to talk about closing or, consolidating schools. And that is a very traumatic thing for neighborhoods and a community. And everybody needs to be at the table having this conversation of how they're going to do this work. And it's tough work, it's tough decisions, and the impact is huge. But who's not at the table are the charters because they don't have to be part of that. And I struggle with that as a community where, we had a raid and all of a sudden there were no workers or there were a lot less workers at Swift and there were no Americans that were just flocking to go fill the jobs. And Swift was losing millions of dollars. And without even giving anybody a heads up, they hired someone to seek out refugees. So we had this huge influx of refugees come to our community and we were scrambling. It's like, okay, one, we're not used to this. We have no training in this. We're not a refugee designated city. Most of them were on their second migration. So there was no federal funds that were following them. So we were kind of on our own as a community trying to grapple with kids that had come from refugee camps that had a lot of trauma, and putting them in our school system and trying to give them supports and what that would even look like. And the charters weren't in that conversation. And I think anytime a community has any kind of change in population, whether it's plus or minus, everybody has to come to the table and we have to figure out how we're going to work this or deal with this. And you handicap a community if charters are not even part of that. Everything has to be on the chopping block, unfortunately. And that includes charters. But because of legislation and they're protected, that's not even part of the conversation. And Fort Collins has a lot of charters. And the fact that they're not even going to be part of that, that means that schools will probably close down and it's going to be in communities of color. And that is alarming to me.
Yeah, that is actually the areas that were looked at the most, had the most diversity, and some of the yeah, lots of things that you just said are wrapped into that conversation as that example. The other thing that worries me when I think about anything that is related to this is when you hear the stories of schools closing overnight, and the way that some of these things diverted funds and then didn't do what they were saying they were doing. Right? You find out that kids were just going to a park every day instead of actually having any education. Like, those things to me are horror stories, because
Right.
they were still getting the funds. Um, you do have stories like what happened in Boston with moving kids around, and then the impacts of that, that's still 40, 50 years later, they're still trying as a community to figure out, how do we bring people together, because our neighborhood schools were the things that we messed with. And so, there is a huge impact with everything that you were just talking about. These aren't isolated incidents. These aren't small things. They exist in so many places. We know where the pitfalls are. We know what some of the significant challenges are. And working together is how you get through that, right? Because there is, as you say, a reason that they exist. There is value to it. They can be a great partner. It is possible to make that work. There are communities that have done that. That there's a reason that public education has included charter schools, but also the the fact that there is a different set of rules for the same public funds also feels to me like a very inequitable thing that concerns me. It concerns me when I look at how just last year we finally, for the first time, made it so that students with disabilities had to be included. And so when you allow one system to siphon off who they want, and segregate students, really,
Yep.
that is harmful to everyone, right? The inclusion is the important part. And if we're supposed to be public education and educating everybody, then doesn't that mean that everybody who's in public education should be educating everybody? When you take the kids that have the highest needs and the highest costs, and you say, "Oh, I don't have to take them," how does that work? So I also just want to see that there is some parity in this.
When I think, for me, I really struggle because I look at the way the nation is right now, and we're so divided. And the reason we're so divided is because we're so stuck in our own bubbles. We have religious bubbles, we have political bubbles. And why would we do that to these young kids? I mean, K-12 is probably the most innocent we will ever be as humans. And that is a wonderful time for us to be introduced to different cultures, different languages, and just how we all live differently. We're not all the same. And that's a great time to learn. You don't have all the biases and all of that stuff. And once you leave our K-12 system, that's what you're going to go out into, whether it's the workforce, whether it's the military, whether it's college. And so why would we not want you prepared for that different kind of diversity? And why would we put you in a bubble to start off with? And so I just struggle with the whole concept. I think there's been some amazing charters that have come to the rescue in certain situations, and charter was the only answer. And they have stepped up to the plate. And I think that's great. And one of the things I've noticed as a state board member is there has to be this balance of space for innovation along with guardrails, because this is taxpayer money and it can't just be a free for all. And so what does that look like? And me as a state board member, I have to look from my community and say, okay, this is going to impact my community this way, and this guardrail needs to be put in place. Or, I think this needs to not even be a situation, the system hasn't worked, and so we need to totally rehaul it and figure out what worked but didn't, and then figure out what needs to be adjusted. And so there's just so much work that we haven't done because we haven't even had the conversation. And I don't understand why we haven't had the conversation. There's so many people that are talking around it, but not really talking deep about it and the impacts and the outcomes and what that could look, how that could look differently. And I think the hardest part is we see people making money off of this, and it should not be happening that way. You can't be making money off the backs of our kids. That's just not, no, that's not right at all. And so we need to put some guardrails to where this is actually about kids. This is actually about students. It's not about candidates. It's not about parties, but it's actually about kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I like about having it all be cohesive and having us all complement and work together and figure it out together is the example that you brought up from Greeley, which is that when we all come to the table and we hear the best practices and we hear the need that's not being met and we go, oh, well, yeah, then we can also figure out how do we take that and make that available. How do we put that into public education if it's missing? How do we make sure that if that's not in my neighborhood school, it should be, right? And that's not to say that we can't have both, because I think there is a place for that, right? But
Correct.
as we have declining birth rates, and so less kids, period, we want to make sure that we are also making sure that all of the environments for all the kids works. And if we allow there to be a different conversation and a different set of rules, then we are going to have different outcomes. And if that's the choice we make, I'd like to have it be the conscious choice and not the accidental, like, oh, I didn't know that was what was going to happen. And that's where the oversight comes in, is people having that broader view to say, this is what we need to keep our eye on as well. And that's not to say that we can't make it work, but we have to have the ability to be together to do it, right?
Well, and
So
we just went through COVID, and
yeah,
one of the great things about COVID, if we say there's some great things about COVID,
tell
is
me.
that we saw some federal money come into districts to really help them through this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We saw these emergency funds come in, and schools were able to do and hire people that they already knew they needed, but they didn't have the funds to do them. And this situation magnified the need for them. And so they were able to hire, attendance people to go actually out and find out where kids are, to do home visits. There was just all of these things that districts were finally able to do because they
Technology,
had this
right?
money. Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that too. And now that money's going away, and now we see these people gone. And so if you fully fund education, we know there's things that we need to do better. There's things that need to be in place. But if you keep making us make decisions on what we have to cut because we don't have the money, then we're not going to have the educational system that you require. And as we were funneling money in for this high risk situation, because this affected all kids, and that meant, kids of all colors, now all of a sudden we're going to, fully fund. But what you don't realize is that these schools in high risk areas, they are always in that all the time. And they constantly need those extra resources to do the work and get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just astonished how we were able to bring in this money, but it was because of the other kids that it affected. But in all reality, we have districts in a lot of different communities that have a lot higher risk and need more resources, and they're always in that emergency state. And so, and now those things are going to go away. And so when people say, oh, it's, it's not going to take more money, you can't just keep throwing money at it. it really is a lot about the money. It really is. And what you can provide for kids.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. There's a handful of things that I feel that we deal with in Colorado that don't make sense, and educational funding is really the top of my list because
And
the
Tabor.
average person doesn't understand it. Yeah, right. It's complicated. It doesn't make sense. Even if you want to understand it, you have to dig in and go deep. And it doesn't make sense with all of the other great things and innovation that we have this system. We have really the oldest educational funding model in the nation, if I remember right. And then we have the impacts of something like Tabor, which doesn't exist anywhere else. And those things have made it so that our state is dealing with challenges that don't exist anywhere else. We have this thriving economy in all these ways, and education. We have one of the highest post-secondary workforces as well, right? So like we're a funnel for people to be doing second post-secondary education, and yet we don't have the funding model to match that at all. And people go, wait, what? That can't be true. And because we do this amazing magic act of somehow still making it work. And we did have this experiment in the last couple of years to see what could we do, where could we put energy and attention that we haven't been able to before. And also we're dealing with the continuing effects. This is definitely not something that just ended. It had a time limit, and then the day that it was over, and things went back to normal. We are a new, different society dealing with the new, different challenges, and we're not funded for that. So we're getting
Exactly.
creative, and that's I think the antidote to the can't throw money at it. We've proven to be very resourceful. We're doing the impossible because we've had to be resourceful. So when you actually give resources to people who have had to be resourceful, they don't go do silly things with it, right? They are
Yep, they already
still
know what
looking at
they
their
need.
list.
Yep,
Yep. And
exactly.
I hope that we can continue to make growth on that as well. Because, and I know that's outside of the CDE realm, but it's definitely a big impact to everything we talked about, right? Everything with education has to be paid for somehow. And so it's worth
Exactly.
talking about.
And it
Yeah.
really needs to be, what message do we want to send from Colorado? We want to send the message that we are going to be an innovative state. If you are a business, you want to show up in Colorado because we're going to have, kids graduating that are, amazing, and you're going to want to hire. And
That's right.
we pay teachers well and we care about them. So you want to come to Colorado to work as a teacher. And if we're not doing that, then why are we not? Let's have that honest conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think there's lots of room to have conversation with our neighbors, with your local school board members, with teachers, and with elected officials. Let's really have this conversation, and let's be that state that teachers want to come teach, and that businesses want to start up, and families want to move into. And just let us have a strong economy, good neighbors, good neighborhoods, good neighborhood schools, and let's do this work well and really take care of our kids.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, as I suspected, we could go on all day, and I would love to actually, because you're talking about all the things I love. With that said, I appreciate your pragmatism so much. I appreciate the fact that you've got this no nonsense, let's just get to the root of it piece, because that's how you get things done, right? That's how you can get to having real conversations and tackling hard challenges. And I'm grateful to have you supporting us and bringing that to the work you're doing because it matters. And I appreciate seeing what you've done, and I can't wait to see you do 6 full years in it. So I know that you're running a race, which means that you probably need support.
Money,
So yes, so
money and
please, if you're
support.
listening to this and you care about education, which I hope you do, get involved. Rhonda, how do people get involved? How do they support you? What's
So
the
I do
easiest
have
way?
a website. You could learn more about my campaign. It's Rhonda and then the number 4 cokids.com. If you have questions or anything, please reach out. It's Rhonda for cokids@gmail.com. Would love to hear about what's going on in your community, how I can help, how I can make sure that you have a voice at the state level. And I'm really, truly representing my congressional district. And I don't have a blind loyalty to anyone. My test is if I can look myself in the mirror and know I made the right vote for kids. And that's the only thing that I can do. And I will fight hard for our kids. I will fight hard for our districts. I will fight hard for teachers. And I want us to have the best kids ever. And I'm here to do the work with you.
I love that. So thank you for taking the time today. I hope you can come back because I have a feeling we could dive into any of these other topics we touched on. Thank you for everything. Please get involved and support Rhonda. She is doing the hard work, and we need somebody to be fighting for our kids right now. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Paid for by the Larimer County Democratic Party, 2001 South Shield Street, Unit B3, Fort Collins, Colorado, 80526, 970-689-6391. Not authorized by any candidate or any candidate's committee. Andrew Yates, registered agent.